What Wyatt Earp did after the OK Corral. The Wild West's bloodiest revenge. Everyone knows the 30 seconds at the OK Corral. Almost no one knows the 6 months that came after. By the spring of 1882, one of Wyatt Earp's brothers is crippled for life and another is dead, shot from the dark while he leaned over a billiard table. And the man the whole country would one day call the great Lawman of Tombstone is about to pin on a federal badge and use it to go hunting. What follows is one of the bloodiest revenge rides in the history of the American West, and at the end of it, Wyatt Earp is not a hero. He is a wanted man, running for the territory line with a price on his head. Subscribe and like before we start. This is the part the movies always cut. Here is the whole story in 2 lines. The gunfight that made Tombstone famous was not the ending. It was the trigger. What came after has a name the legend tends to bury. They called it the Earp Vendetta Ride, and it turned the most celebrated lawman on the frontier into a fugitive the courts never managed to put on trial. So start with the part you already know, and keep it short, because here it is only the fuse. On the 26th of October, 1881, in a narrow lot near the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona Territory, the Earp brothers and a tubercular dentist named John Henry Holliday faced a group of men the town called the Cowboys. About 30 seconds and a storm of gunfire later, 3 men lay dead in the dirt and the Earp name was burned into American memory for good. But understand this clearly, that fight did not settle the war in Tombstone. It started it, because the men killed in that lot had brothers and friends, and those men had no intention of letting it end in a courtroom. The first answer came on a December night. It was the 28th of December, 1881, just 2 months after the famous fight. Virgil Walter Earp, the oldest of the brothers in town, the man who actually wore the badge of town marshal, was crossing a Tombstone street in the dark when shotguns opened up on him from an unfinished building across the way. The buckshot tore into his back and his left arm and shattered the bone above the elbow. Virgil lived, but that arm hung useless for the rest of his life. When the doctors told his wife they could not save the limb whole, Virgil is said to have answered that he still had one good arm left to hold her with. He would never raise a rifle the same way again. Nobody was convicted for it. Then came the night that ended Wyatt Earp's career as a lawman and began something far darker. It was the 18th of March, 1882. Morgan Earp, the youngest brother in Tombstone, just 30 years old, was playing a late game of billiards at Campbell and Hatch's saloon. There was a glass panel in the rear door of that room. A man standing in the dark alley behind it took aim through the glass and fired. The shot struck Morgan in the back, cut across his spine, and dropped him. He died inside the hour, on a couch in that same building, with his brothers around him. He was not in a gunfight. He was leaning over a pool table under a lamp, an easy target lit up for a killer he never saw. And here is the turn that this whole story rests on, with one brother maimed and one brother murdered, both shot from ambush, from the dark. By men he could name but could not convict, Wyatt Earp made a decision. He stopped trying to be a lawman. He decided to become something the law had no word for. To understand why he made that choice, you have to understand the town he was standing in. Tombstone in 1882 was not a place where justice ran in a straight line. It was a silver boom town split clean down the middle, and the split ran through the law itself. On one side stood the Earps and their allies, mostly Northern, Republican, tied to the town merchants and the mining money. On the other side stood the Cowboys, a loose brotherhood of ranchers, rustlers, and gunmen who ran cattle and contraband across the nearby border with Mexico. The Clantons rode with them. So did the McClorys, 2 of whom died in that lot near the corral. And crucially, so did the county sheriff. That sheriff was John Behan, and he held the office that mattered most for an arrest. The office of Cochise County Sheriff. Behan and Wyatt Earp had hated each other for over a year, partly over politics, partly over a woman they had both courted. Behan was friendly with the cowboy faction. And in a county where the sheriff sympathized with the very men you believed had shot your brothers, the legal road was not just slow. It was closed. That is the heart of the motive. It was not simple bloodlust. It was a man looking at the machinery of the law and seeing that the machinery had been captured by the people he was trying to bring in. A coroner's inquest into Morgan's killing actually named names. It pointed to a cowboy named Frank Stillwell, to a man called Pete Spence, to a half-Mexican laborer known as Florentino Cruz, and to others. But naming them on paper and putting them in a cell were 2 different things, and everyone in Tombstone knew which one was likely to happen. So Wyatt did something clever and cold. He went and got himself a different kind of authority. There was a federal officer in the territory, the United States Marshal Crawley Dake, who answered to Washington, not to the local cowboy faction. Through that office, Wyatt held a commission as a Deputy United States Marshal, the federal badge that his wounded brother Virgil had also carried. On paper, that badge gave Wyatt the power to raise a posse and pursue federal fugitives anywhere in the territory. What he actually did with it was something the federal government never intended. He turned a manhunt for justice into a manhunt for revenge. And the line between those two things is exactly where this story lives. Was he a lawman serving warrants the corrupt county would not serve? Or was he a grieving brother using a badge as cover to kill the men he blamed? More than a century later, people still argue about it. Watch what he did and decide for yourself. The vendetta began before Morgan was even in the ground. The Earps decided the surviving family was no longer safe in Tombstone. The plan was to put the wounded Virgil and his wife on a train and send them west to the safety of the family in California, and to ship Morgan's body home as well. So a small armed party escorted them by wagon and then by rail toward the depot at the town of Tucson, about 70 miles to the northwest in the neighboring county. Wyatt rode with them. So did the dentist, Doc Holliday, and a handful of hard men who had thrown in with the Earps. Among them were Wyatt's youngest brother Warren Earp, a former cowboy turned Earp ally named Sherman McMaster, a fighter remembered as Turkey Creek Jack Johnson, and a Confederate veteran called Texas Jack Vermillion. They reached the Tucson rail yard on the evening of the 20th of March, 1882. And there, lurking near the tracks in the dark, the party spotted a familiar face. It was Frank Stillwell, the very man the inquest had pointed to in Morgan's murder, a man who had every reason to want the surviving Earps dead before they could leave the territory. What happened next was over in minutes. Stillwell ran. The Earp party went after him along the tracks. And the next morning, railroad workers found Frank Stillwell's body sprawled beside the rails, riddled with buckshot and rifle fire. By Wyatt's own account, given years later, he ran the man down and killed him at close range. The exact details of those final seconds come mostly from the men who did the killing, so treat the precise picture as their account rather than settled fact. But the body was real and the message it sent was unmistakable. The hunted had become the hunter. And in that instant, on the night of the 20th of March, the legend changed. Up to that moment, Wyatt Earp could still claim he was a lawman. Frank Stillwell had been killed in another county, with no warrant, by an armed party that then vanished into the desert. Whatever you wanted to call that, it was not an arrest. From that night on, Wyatt was not pursuing the law. He was outrunning it. He did not stop. 2 days later, on the 22nd of March, the posse rode into the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains to a wood camp run by Pete Spence, another man the inquest had named. Spence himself was not there, but a laborer was, the half-Mexican woodcutter known as Florentino Cruz, whom the cowboys and the Earps alike called Indian Charlie. The Earp party believed he had served as a lookout the night Morgan was shot. He was found in those hills and he was killed. Again, the close detail comes from the men who were there, and the accounts do not all agree. What is not in doubt is that another name from the inquest list was crossed off, this time with a gun rather than a gavel. By now, the posse had become something between a holy mission and an outlaw band, and the line between the two had all but disappeared. They rode through the back country of southeastern Arizona for days, sleeping rough, living off what they carried, moving between ranches and waterholes, hunting the men they held responsible and dodging the county sheriff's own posse that had been raised to hunt them. 2 days after the wood camp on the 24th of March, came the most famous and the most disputed moment of the entire ride, at a desert watering place remembered as Iron Springs, or by some as Mescal Springs. The Earp party is said to have ridden straight into an ambush set by a group of cowboys. In the fight that followed, by Wyatt's own telling, he came face to face with the most feared gunman of the whole cowboy faction, a man named William Brocius, known across the territory simply as Curly Bill. Wyatt said he stood his ground in the open with a shotgun while bullets cut his coat and saddle, and that he killed Curly Bill where he stood. Here you have to slow down, because this is where the legend and the record pull hard against each other. Wyatt Earp insisted to the end of his life that he killed Curly Bill at Iron Springs that day. The Earp-friendly newspaper, the Tombstone Epitaph, printed the death and even offered a reward over it. But the rival paper, the Tombstone Nugget, which leaned the other way, scoffed at the story and claimed Curly Bill had been seen alive long after. No body was ever produced, no grave was ever found. To this day, historians still debate whether Wyatt Earp really gunned down Curly Bill that afternoon or whether the gunman simply vanished from the record on his own. The honest answer is that we do not know. What we do know is that after the spring of 1882, Curly Bill Brocius was never reliably heard from again, so set the body count to one side, because counting bodies misses the real story. By the end of March 1882, here is where Wyatt Earp stood. He had buried one brother and shipped another out crippled. He had killed Frank Stillwell at a rail yard, killed Florentino Cruz at a wood camp, claimed Curly Bill at a desert spring, and left a trail of dead cowboys across 2 counties. He was riding under a federal badge that no judge had authorized him to use this way. And now the law he had once enforced turned its full weight on him, because the killing of Frank Stillwell back at the Tucson Depot had been witnessed, and Stillwell had died in Pima County, not in Earp country. A warrant was sworn out, and this time the name on the warrant was not a cowboy's. It was Wyatt Earp's, and the names of every man who had ridden with him. The hunter was now formally, legally, a wanted man for murder. Sheriff John B. Han, the very man Wyatt despised, now had the paper he needed. He raised a county posse and went after the Earp party in earnest. And here the geography of the West did the rest. Wyatt did not wait to be taken. He gathered his men and rode hard, out of Arizona territory altogether, across the line into New Mexico, pausing near the mining town of Silver City, and then on toward Colorado. The desert that had hidden his hunt now covered his escape. Colorado is where the story should have ended on a gallows or in a cell. It did not. And the reason it did not has nothing to do with gunfights and everything to do with politics. When Wyatt and Doc Holliday reached Colorado, Arizona's authorities tried to have them extradited, dragged back across the line to stand trial for the Vendetta killings. Doc Holliday was actually arrested in Colorado on the Arizona warrant, but powerful friends went to work. The famous frontier Lawman Bat Masterson, an old friend, used his influence and helped arrange matters so that the extradition stalled. The governor of Colorado was persuaded that the men would be murdered, rather than tried if they were sent back to cowboy country, and he refused to hand them over. The legal papers from Arizona simply died on a desk far away. Think about what that means. The whole machinery of state law, the warrants, the sheriff, the courts, came down on Wyatt Earp at last, and it could not touch him. He had escaped Cochise County's corrupt justice by becoming a killer. And then he escaped justice altogether by crossing a state line and finding the right friends. He was never extradited. He was never tried for the Vendetta Ride. He was never convicted of anything that happened in those weeks of March and April 1882. And that is the strangest part of all. A man kills several people across a territory, outside any law, while carrying a federal badge, and then walks away clean and lives nearly 50 more years. Wyatt Earp drifted through boom towns and gold rushes, ran saloons and gambling halls, chased silver in one place and gold in another, and slowly, deliberately, helped build his own legend. He outlived almost every man who could have contradicted him. He even spent time near Hollywood at the very end, telling his version to writers and to the young men who would go on to make the Western a national myth. By the time he died in 1929, an old man in a Los Angeles apartment, the bloody hunt of 1882 had been polished down into a clean tale of frontier justice. So pull it all back together. The 30 seconds at the OK Corral made Wyatt Earp famous, and that is the story you were told. But it is not the truest story. The truest story is the 6 months that came after, when a lawman watched the courts fail, picked up a federal badge, and used it to run down the men he blamed, one at a time, across the deserts and mountains of Arizona territory. He crossed the line from enforcing the law to taking it into his own hands, and the law never once held him to account. We like our frontier heroes to be clean. We like to believe the badge meant the man wore the right. But the records tell a colder thing. The most famous lawman of the American West earned his immortality not at the gunfight everyone remembers, but in the revenge ride almost no one does. And the deepest truth of the Earp Vendetta is not that the hero won. It is that, out on the frontier, the difference between a lawman and an outlaw could come down to nothing more than who held the badge, who held the grudge, and which way a man chose to ride when the courtroom door closed in his face.